Hello, welcome to the HR Strategy in the Hot Seat podcast. My name's Anwen Botois, I'm your host, and I'm the founder of Purple Sky Consulting. I'm a leadership promotion specialist, and I also have a bit of a side hustle where I focus on development of HR leaders. So as the title of the podcast suggests, this is going to be all about HR strategy and how we can help HR professionals to consider the strategic elements of HR in more depth. Now let's get started with this episode. Hi, Tom. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. You are our very first guest expert on HR strategy in the hot seat. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. You didn't tell me that before we started recording. So I'll take that.
Hey, you've got to have your go-to people to go and have brilliant conversations with when you're starting something new. So I'm very happy to have you on as my very first guest.
Well, I'm really delighted to be here. Yeah.
Excellent.
Excited.
Lovely. So how about you start doing a quick introduction for our listeners? Who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Tom Emery. I sometimes describe myself as either a recovering HR leader or an honorary HR leader, probably depending on the audience. But yeah, I was an HR practitioner for a long time, over 20 years, and worked across lots of different businesses. But most of my time was in financial services. So with HSBC, doing lots of different roles, including head of HR for First Direct Bank and looking after HR operations for the UK. And then I was chief people officer at a wealth and asset management firm in the city called Brooks Macdonald. And I left there in 2023, early 2023, to set up my business Hex. And we call ourselves people performance consultants. And we do a mix of leadership development, individual coaching, team effectiveness work, and broader HR consultancy.
Awesome. So on that basis, I assume you have a lot to say about HR strategy, which is good to have you here with us. So tell us a little bit about your experiences with HR strategy before we get onto your topic.
Well, I suppose that in the different jobs that I had varying responsibility for either creating and delivering HR strategy or, in earlier roles, just delivering it. So I suppose particularly at Brooks Macdonald, when I was the chief people officer, I was reporting to the CEO. We had a very ambitious agenda of change, lots of work to do to transform the way that the organization was run, its cost base, its approach to growth, its governance, its compensation structures, its culture, and all those things had an element that fed into what do we do with our people and how do we get the best out of our people. And I suppose that was my main experience. As I've then set up my own business, I work a lot coaching and mentoring HR leaders. And also I wrote a book about how to be a really great HR leader called People. And, a big part of the work that I do is to act as a thinking partner for HR leaders that are trying to translate business strategy into what that means for them. And I don't think we can divorce HR strategy from business strategy. It is business strategy. And I think that's probably, one of the things about the mindset. And we're going to talk about that, I think, in today's episode. That's got to be the mindset for HR leaders, that we've got to think about the work that we do as business strategy first and foremost.
Absolutely. Core to it, isn't it? It's part of it. It is business strategy, isn't it? And I love that description that you gave there around kind of really talked about choices. What choices are we making to enable the business to be successful? I think that's a really lovely way of kind of introducing that piece of the work you were doing in that HR strategy space.
Yeah. I mean, choice is a really interesting thing for HR leaders, because I think that when we look at how the profession is sometimes spoken of in the press, it gets sometimes a bit of a bum deal. And there have been several articles quite recently, actually. And there was one in the Times and there was one in the Telegraph fairly recently about this proliferation.
I'm glad you said that.
Proliferation of HR people into businesses, but actually they don't sort of see them as as really doing anything particularly useful. And it's quite easy, I think, to find yourself in this position in senior HR roles where you don't actually think you have much choice and you have much agency. There are people out there that are making a living around telling HR leaders how awful things are for them. And I hate all that. Like, I'm really about, you've got an opportunity here.
Yes.
And if you change your mindset around your role, around how the things that you influence in your role in terms of strategy can be really beneficial for the organization, then that's where you're going to find impact. It's where you're going to find happiness. It's where you're going to find enjoyment in the job. And just a very quick anecdote. I ran a webinar a while ago about the CHRO impact framework that I built. And one of the chief people officers on that, lady called Sarah Chadbourne, she's based up in Manchester, not far from you, Anwen.
Okay. Yeah.
She talked about a conversation that she had with one of the non-execs in her company about where she was going with her career. And one of these non-execs said, where do you see yourself going, Sarah? Do you see yourself going into a business role? And she was like, well, what do you mean? Like, I am in a business role. And I always remember that. And I always try now to stop talking about HR and the business as something separate. It is the business.
It is the business, absolutely. I think we've got quite a similar outlook on how we feel about that HR profession and how it's viewed and how it's treated, but also maybe how, as a HR lifer myself, until I took on my business, it's our responsibility to own that space and own our impact and our value to the business and not see that as something just as a support function.
Yeah, and I think we forget that, or I think there's like this expectation that as an HR leader, you're not allowed to have an ego and you're not allowed to have identity and sort of pride in what you do sometimes. And I think that's a mistake. I think people have more agency than they think. And my sort of work with HR leaders, I suppose, is about saying, okay, like what are the assumptions that you're making about the system that you work in, and how can you change your behavior, even if it's just marginally change it, to start making an impact to create that agency. And if I give you an example, often I think we HR leaders sort of look around at the system and think, well, the system can't change. It's all like everything's coming at me and I don't know what to do about it. And I hear lots of complaints that HR leaders are not in the room when decisions are made, or they're not put on the exco and therefore they can't make the influence that they need to make, or they're at the mercy of other people's priorities and things like that. And that response to look externally and complain about the behavior of others, I think, is a mistake. And my view is like, okay, well, let's start looking at what you can do and look at yourself. How are you behaving? How are you turning up? Are you turning up in a really objective and pragmatic way? Are you asking the right questions? Are you using channels that you do have to put through forward your ideas? And are you saying no to the minutiae so that you can really focus on the value add and all that sort of stuff? And that might be really uncomfortable, actually, to behave in that way. So, I think if you've got something useful to add, people will invite you in. So you've got to start getting out the useful role that you can play.
Absolutely. And persevering with it as well, especially if an organization hasn't been used to HR leaders playing that role in that organization. You might need to train them on the habit of you showing up in that way. I think that's really critical.
Yeah. And I mean, I work with a very simple framework for feedback and for giving people, for being able to express yourself in a way that is clear and non-threatening and non-judgmental to other people. Because if you go to your CEO and say, like, I'm not on the exco, therefore I can't get involved in these decisions and you need to put me on the exco. Well, there's like a bit of a challenge there. There's a bit of a judgment to that person. But if you can just observe what you see going on to say, like, I'd really like to be involved in this decision. Can I get involved in the discussion? That's a very different way of putting it and likely to be more successful, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's the focused on impact rather than just being at the table, isn't it?
And being quite mindful, intentional about actually, and not vague, because if people say, well, the people agenda is really important to this company, so I should be in the room for every decision, that's meaningless to because most people will think, well, I know people, I can do that bit. I don't need anybody's help to do that. But if you say, I can help with this decision in this way, then it's becomes something more tangible, and people can say, oh, yeah, okay, well, let's get you in on that conversation.
Awesome. Love that. So, Tom, I think you've mentioned it already. We're talking about mindset today. So, talk to me about why you want to put mindset in the hot seat.
Well, so, I mean, there's a couple of people's work. They're very different people I quote around the power of mindset. So there are two people. One is a lady called Ellen Langer, and she is a Harvard Business School professor. She's been around a long time. I think she's in her late 70s now. And back in the 1970s, she did this piece of work called the counterclockwise study, which was such an interesting study. And it was about elderly gentlemen to go to a ranch in the middle of nowhere, and for a week or 2 weeks, I forget what it was, they had to live as if it was the 1950s. So they had to live as if they were 20 years younger. And so they listened to 50s music, they had 50s furniture, they had 50s newspapers, they talked about the 50s. You couldn't, you just had to be really immersed in it. And she found that all these people had significant improvements in their mobility, cognition, eyesight, hearing, right? And she did lots and lots of different studies like that. She got another one was that she got chambermaids in a hotel. She split them up, and 50% of them had to think about the work that they were doing as exercise. So when they were vacuuming, cleaning, whatever, they had to think, this is exercise that I'm doing. And the others didn't. And the ones that believed it was exercise or lost weight, right? So this really strange thing that the mind can do, to you physically, and just power of it's incredible. And the other one is very, very different. And that's Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was a psychologist and a Holocaust survivor. And, just almost sort of came up with this idea that you have a choice about how you respond to your surroundings. Now, I'm not saying that being an HR leader is like being, a victim of the Holocaust. But there were just two very, very different opinions around how you can change your mindset to be more impactful. And so I'm really big on supporting people with their mindset, getting rid of self-limiting thoughts, really learning how to push into the discomfort of trying new things and doing things which feel difficult, because that's where the magic is, and that's where you become more successful. And I think HR leaders can do that.
Absolutely. And what I love about those two examples are that first one is about how do you set up your mindset in the first place? How do you go into something? And then the second one felt more like and how do you then respond as a result of either how you've gone into it or how you didn't go into it or how others went into it.
Yeah, I love that actually. So I hadn't really thought about it like that. So there's like one is about proactive. It's like, okay, how do I set myself up, for success? And what are the things that someone who is proactively developing a really great mindset, what are the things that they do to do that? And then the other one is like, how do you react to events? Because, we can't control what's going to happen. I think too many of us believe that we can control things that we can't control. And actually, if we recognize that we can't control, but we can cope and we can thrive even in difficult circumstances, then that's going to be helpful for us.
Definitely. And I think as HR leaders, we set ourselves up to fail a little bit by expecting to be able to control things, especially people. And actually, that's probably the hardest thing anybody can control, because you can't control how somebody's thinking, how somebody behaves. Yes, you can try and influence, but your response to it is the most important part of any of that. And as long as you're going into it with the right approach, there's a good chance you are going to influence in the right way, but you still can't control the response.
No, definitely not. And I think there's a broader leadership point here about leaders who can, like, sort of, I suppose, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, synthesize complexity into like really actionable clarity will outperform, I think, those who try to control every single variable. And if you think about, often often in HR roles, you're dealing with difficult conversations and you're not seeing people at their best. And I think sometimes we fall into the trap of thinking that, we have to make things all right for people. For example, like if we're supporting a redundancy program, we want everyone to walk away from their at-risk meeting feeling, okay about it. It's impossible. You've just told them that they're going to lose their job potentially. Like, there's nothing you can do there, but just say, I hear you. I'm here for you. That's it. Go and process, and then we'll talk again. And similarly, when you've got lots and lots of things coming at you, so I think sometimes we sort of think that we have to have control over everything, and we have to do everything that the business. Oh, I fell into that trap.
Yeah.
Then that the organization needs us to do. And so, an example was I was working with an HR team, and we were doing an exercise where we were like chucking up everything on the wall of everything they had to do in all the 4 quarters of the year, bit of planning of the strategy. And, some of the things that were on there, I started to question them. And one of them was a mentoring program where they were taking time to match mentors and mentees and trying to really control who got who and how would that work and making sure that they were the right pairing. And I was like, why are you doing that? Like, what's the point? Just set the framework up, get people to match themselves. Like, you can't control the bits that, the relationships that are going to go well and the ones that don't, and just give the mechanism for people to exit the relationship if it's needed. But actually, sometimes we fall into a trap as well of, we think these are, we sort of think of these things as, oh, this is just stuff we've got to do. But actually we do it because we like it.
Yeah.
And we like doing that sort of stuff. But then we like to moan about it afterwards. And I think, so I think let's be really honest with ourselves about what we can control, what we can't control, and what we're actually trying to control because we want to control it, not because it needs to be controlled.
Absolutely. So tell me a bit more about your thoughts on mindset and why it should be in the HR strategy hot seat.
Well, I mean, I just think there's so many areas that we can have a different sort of mindset on to achieve what we need to achieve as HR leaders. And I suppose I just talked about what the organization needs from us, for example. And I think this is a really key one, because I think if we have a mindset of providing the organization with what it needs, as opposed to a mindset where we provide the organization with what it wants, we might be more successful. And often those two are different things. And often we need to challenge people within our organizations about what they think they need and have a conversation with them to, potentially come to a different outcome. I don't want to be so patronizing that it's like, oh, we know what you need and you don't know what you need, because that's not right. And I think it's really easy for HR leaders to fall into this trap of talking about educating people all the time. Yeah. And I think that's like real turn off. Yeah. Personally, we need to educate the business on what they've got to do here. And it's like, I'm not sure that's right. But we do have an opportunity by being really curious, by asking the right questions, by saying when we don't think something is right, just setting it out there, not necessarily saying what we need to do, but just, setting it out. It's like, oh, this doesn't feel quite right, or this doesn't feel like it's going to get to our final objective. I think if we can take that mindset of, we're not here to please people, we are here to achieve results, and that goes back to the business strategy. I think that is going to, I just think that is going to create more credible, more impactful HR teams. And I think that's the way actually you get the invitation to the top table and the invitation to the right sort of conversations.
It's shifting from that service model to the impact model, isn't it? And we've talked about choices already, haven't we? In terms of, if we're not having the right type of conversation that circles back to what the organization's trying to achieve, then so what? Why are we just saying, yes, we'll do that for you, rather than having a better conversation to really get to the point of solving the problems or taking control of the opportunities that are in front of us, rather than just going, hey, I went on this thing and I really liked it and I think we need to do it everywhere for everybody in the organization, rather than stepping back and going, well, how does this help us achieve ABC?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just coincidentally, actually, something you said there about like, oh, I've seen this and maybe it worked. I think there's like a place for that.
Yeah, there
As
is
like,
sometimes, yes.
I think we have to also, because it's another point actually, is we also have to have the mindset of we can suggest innovation and we can drive that rather than responding all the time to requests
Agree.
and all that. But no, I mean, it's a really good point. And I mean, we've probably all been in that situation where we've had somebody come to us and say like, oh, I want to do this and this is how I want to do it and can you help me? There is a skill, and not all people sadly working in HR have that skill to be able to challenge back on that and say, okay, what are you trying to achieve, and let's talk about if that's the best way to achieve it, or are there some other options that might be more cost effective, more impactful, better for the culture, whatever it is. And I think sometimes that takes bravery, particularly if you are working in a chief people officer, a chief HR officer role, you're working for the CEO, you might have, a really demanding board or really demanding investors that are just coming to you and saying, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. It takes bravery. There's interpersonal risk
Yes, there is.
in challenging back on that. But I think the most impactful HR leaders that I see that are driving the most effective strategy are the ones that are doing that.
Yeah, agree. Absolutely agree. And I think it's a really interesting area. And you've touched on ego and how HR sometimes doesn't serve its ego sometimes, but sometimes it really does. And I know I have been guilty of this before, of I have the right answer to this situation or this scenario, and how our mindset remains open to not sticking to the stuff we've known or the stuff that we feel like is the solution to the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is this is another aspect of how you influence successfully as well. And I think we have a mindset that, I don't know whether you've ever been in this sort of position where you've had to go to your exco potentially to get approval for something like, I don't know, like a leadership development program or something like that. So you got to get approval for a load of money or a way forward. And, you sort of know it's going to be difficult. You're going to get a bit of challenge, but you build it up as like, oh, I've got to get this through. I've got to get this through. And I've got to, come up with the right paper and the right deck and the right conversation and all that sort of stuff. And actually, I don't think that's the way that influencing works. So I think you influence people incrementally, and you don't necessarily talk about, you don't necessarily hang your hat on single events or single conversations to get what you need. So, you got to almost like drip feed these things in. You got to be talking to people. You've got, got outside meetings. You've got to be like, getting people comfortable with the direction that you want to go, getting their input, getting their views on things. And I think if HR leaders spent a lot more time on the relationships rather than on the sort of what, they might become more successful. And I think as well, that goes for stuff like, if you want to be part of discussions and part of decisions, you might have to start now. I'm just going to start feeding in some of my views through whatever channel they are. I'm going to do it really gradually. I'm just going to chip in, just say what I see, or whatever. And then at some point, somebody's going to come back and say, Amwin, what was that you're saying? Can I just ask you a bit more about that? And that's your opportunity then to give a few more views. And that's then, that just develops a bit of trust, bit of credibility, and it starts to go over time. But that is like, if you've ever read James Clear and his Atomic Habits, that is like, that's chipping away. That's the sort of things, they are the sort of things that influential people do to become influential. So you just have to act like one and you'll become one, if you like.
Totally. And that's the skill in the strategy space, isn't it? Actually, by having those little drip moments, that's where you're hearing feedback. That's where you're able to be more curious about what's really going on. And that then helps you get to a place where actually you are in a conversation that is really valuable.
Yeah, definitely. And added to that is a mindset of curiosity, I think is it's an overused word, curiosity. We're all told to be more curious, but it is really valuable. Like if you're the sort of person that goes and asks questions and asks the the right sort of questions, so not like really sort of questions that are like dripping with sarcasm or
Judgment.
passive aggressiveness or
What
judgment.
were you thinking
Yeah,
when
why
you
did
chose
you do
to
that?
do?
Yeah, why are we doing this? It seems ridiculous. Like it's not that sort of thing. It's just it's being able to just articulate, say like, oh, I don't know, it just feels a bit weird. This like, what are we trying to achieve here? Or it's just these little questions. They're not. I think that is so valuable, and having that mindset of I'm just going to find out what's going on here.
Yeah. Understand, listen, observe, play it back.
Exactly.
It's so important, isn't it? In terms of, are we all on the same page?
Yeah. And if you go, Ellen Langer, back to Ellen Langer's work, she's often called the I think sometimes she gets called the mother of mindfulness. And it's not mindfulness in terms of the meditation, which it has a different definition. It's mindfulness in I'm just going to be mindful about how I approach situations, how I approach conversations. And she argues that she's never, ever depressed or anxious because she just enjoys everything that she does. She just reminds herself everything that she's doing. She tries to enjoy it. So if she's got to floss her teeth, she makes a bit of a game out of it, It's like flosses her teeth and enjoys it, And I sometimes like, I don't know, when you're like trouncing out the door with the dog at 6:30 in the morning and it's absolutely chucking it down with rain and blowing a gale, it's quite difficult to think, I'm just going to really enjoy this. But you can. I think you can.
I do feel like I might have a mindset deficit in that space.
Yeah. Well, next time he's flossing, just make it a game. It'll make you change your life. Change your life.
Anything else that was on your minds, Tom?
I think the other thing that I notice in HR leaders in terms of a mindset is an element of perfectionism. And I think trying to move our mindset from a mindset of perfectionism and always needing to get everything right to a sort of more like an adaptability mindset. So, planning is important, but planning is not predicting. Planning is preparing, and you can't prepare for everything. That's the control point. So I think we need to be prepared to deliver, but we also need to be flexible when the context change. And I think a lot of the behaviors I see in organizations that are unhealthy are focused around perfectionism and controlling outcomes rather than just looking for what's really good enough in this context and accepting that very little in life is 100% perfect. And that willingness to not have everything absolutely perfect is brilliant for creating progress over inertia, building confidence, building resilience and all that sort of stuff to get stuff done. So I think, that mindset is really important in delivering HR strategy and HR impact.
Very much so. And I think there's something really important there about actually how much time and energy do we put into trying to be perfect with the solution or the proposal? How about we step back and experiment, be prepared to try stuff out first and then talk about the results from those experiments to then feed into a broader approach. And I think that desire to go, this is the right thing and we're going to do it big bang. Actually, if we can be braver around that point of playing with things and learning from those and helping our organization to be comfortable with that, we're actually then role modeling kind of that growth mentality and that ability to learn and to fail and to grow with that.
Yeah, and we can really easily set up the containers for trying new things. And I think that goes back again to being mindful about like, how are we operating and how do we respond when things go wrong? Like I did some work with a big telecoms company, and one of the senior leaders there, I never forget this story. She said, we have a session every so often just to remind ourselves about how we deal with mistakes. And we use live examples and we get permission from the people that have, dropped the ball. And some of these mistakes are quite costly, but they are human error, where it's not the fact that it's human error. It's not the human being that's let it down. It's the system that's let people down because they've not got the right checks or they've ask too much of someone or whatever. And I just thought it was a really mature way of doing that and really promoting, like we do innovate, we do make mistakes. That's okay. Not too many, but we can make some, and that's going to be good for us.
We used to do that at British Gas, and I'm sure they probably do that now around safety. And that could have been a really easy place to be really kind of strict on. And of course, there were times where if it was purely a human behavior piece, we needed to look at that, but we tried not to look at it from that angle in the first instance. It was around looking at what actually happened here and what might we do to prevent that happening in future, and learning from the experience of things. But it takes an organization to be brave in that. And that's where HR really can help shape the environment people are in, isn't it?
Yeah, so powerful. Yeah.
So, Tom, we're going to start closing things off now. So I just wanted to get your final input in one way, the one takeaway that you would give HR leaders to be thinking about or implementing in some way so that they can really increase the impact that they have with the HR strategy.
It probably won't surprise anybody who knows me, who might be listening to this, that I'll talk about leadership and focusing on leaders. I just think that a big part of any successful strategy where people are concerned, that is sometimes neglected, is to focus on how people experience other people's leadership in the organization. So I think we often focus on tools for leadership. We focus on what does a good leader do, but we don't necessarily focus on how a great leader makes people feel. And if we think about operating mindfully as leaders and how our HR colleagues in any organization can really help leaders to focus on this, if we can get leaders to really self-reflect and reflect on, how do people experience me, and what's the gap between how people actually experience me and how I want to be experienced, and what can I do to make changes to create a different feeling? I think that is going to be transformational for organizations that are working, with lots more AI and things like that, much more of a hybrid environment. Just be mindful, encourage everybody to be mindful about how they're turning up, and I think organizations can transform.
Love that. A huge advocate of that attitude to things and how we support leaders to focus there. That's what we remember, isn't it? The experience that they create for us.
It's the old Maya Angelou quote.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Definitely. It's how people feel. And it's a privilege, isn't it, as a leader to have that in your hands?
Exactly.
Wonderful. Well, that's a really lovely way to finish that off. Tom, where can people find you?
You can link in with me on LinkedIn. Always really happy for people to say hello. My website is hex-development.com. And you can also hear us on the Beyond Potential podcast, which is, lots of interesting ramblings with me and my colleague Tom, and, great guests like you, Anwen.
Yes, it is an excellent podcast, by the way. So I'm quite happy to give it a shout out. Not just my episodes. Like, I love listening to all the episodes. So it is a go-to podcast for me. So I will make sure all those links are in the show notes. So please go and follow Tom and listen to the brilliant podcast.
Oh, sorry, one more thing as well. If anybody wants a copy of my book, just drop me a line on LinkedIn. I'll send you a free copy, totally free of charge.
Great book, and there's some brilliant support for you as an HR leader in your development. So I really recommend that. Thank you, Tom.
Been brilliant. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, Anwen.
Thank you for joining this episode of HR Strategy in the Hot Seats. Please leave us a review. Let us know what you think about this episode. What did you think about the topic? If you have any thoughts on topics, themes, questions, guests you'd like me to cover in future episodes, please do let me know. Get in touch with me via LinkedIn or drop me an email at anwen@purpleskyconsulting.co.uk. Hope that you could join us on the next episode, and make sure you share this with any of your network too. Thank you.